Hey guys, it's Greg with Apple Explained, and in this video, I want to finally acknowledge something that's discussed quite a bit by news outlets and people in the tech community, and that's whether or not Apple is doomed. Now, I've ignored this topic for a while because personally, I think it's pretty unreasonable to believe that one of the richest, most influential companies in the world is doomed to failure, but that idea has been given so much consideration lately that I felt the need to publicly challenge it. Now, I don't want this to be all from my perspective, so I asked you guys for your opinions a couple days ago, which I really appreciate by the way, and I picked out 6 comments that I think made interesting points to include in the video. Now, if you want to give your own opinion on future topics, don't forget to subscribe, and those polls should show up right in your mobile activity feed. Now, as you can probably tell from the title, I don't think Apple is doomed to failure anytime soon, but Apple's stock price has dipped quite a bit since the beginning of November, and that's triggered talks of Apple's demise yet again. So let's explore this idea in depth, starting with what I just mentioned, Apple's stock. Now, the first thing you should know about the stock market is that it's extremely fickle. One day a company's stock could be soaring, while the next it could be dropping just as quickly. And that's because the stock market is driven by human behavior. If there's good news about a company, lots of investors buy their stock. But if something's perceived as bad, they sell their stock before it drops in value. And this causes a sort of domino effect that heavily influences the stock price of a company. Now, in Apple's case, they had been enjoying a fairly steady increase in their stock price since mid-2016, but this all changed on November 1st, when the company announced they'd no longer be reporting unit sales for the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. And as you can see on the graph, this caused Apple's stock to take a nosedive, which means investors thought it was a bad sign that Apple's no longer making unit sales public. But why exactly do they think it's a bad thing? Well, I think Raul summed it up nicely with his comment, saying, Apple has lost its vision and is losing its loyal fans. Now it's basically running on fumes. And while it's true that sales for certain Apple products like the iPhone are slowing, that doesn't mean Apple's losing customers. It means products like the iPhone have enjoyed unbelievable growth for the past decade, and now the market has become saturated. In other words, most of the people who wanted an iPhone have already bought one. So now sales are slowing since Apple has to wait on all their existing customers to upgrade their devices. And this phenomenon isn't limited to Apple. It's an industry-wide problem happening to virtually every major tech company out there, which is why Google and Samsung haven't been reporting unit sales of their smartphones for years. But when Apple decides to stop reporting their numbers, suddenly it means the company is doomed, which is a complete overreaction. Because when it comes to a company's value, sales numbers are irrelevant. What really matters is how much revenue is being generated. And Apple is experiencing very healthy revenue growth thanks to an increase in the average selling price of the iPhone, which has increased 17% from 2017. And while we're on the topic of Apple's stock, I want to mention this comment from Randy, who said, "I love it when their stock goes down. That means it's on sale." And I think that's a very clever way to think about this situation. Instead of panicking and buying into the idea that one of the richest companies will be going bankrupt, think rationally and understand that stock goes up and down. And buying when it's down is a terrific opportunity to see a quick return on your investment. And that brings me to another reason why people think Apple is doomed. Because they're raising prices on products like the iPad Pro, iPhone, MacBook Air, and Mac Mini. Here's what Gandalf himself had to say about it. The company became so arrogant and money hungry, they literally started insulting their own fan base by increasing the prices beyond $1,500, removing features, removing ports, making products unrepairable, and having the audacity of asking for extremely high repair prices. Now, I'm not sure what product he's referring to when he says they're increasing prices beyond $1,500, but either way, his point is that Apple is just trying to make as much money as possible and they're screwing over their fan base along the way. And if this were true, I think that many people would be flocking to Apple's competitors, but that isn't the case at all. In fact, iOS's market share in the US has either remained steady or grown over the last 10 years. And let's say you are fed up with the iPhone's price increases and the fact that it isn't easy to repair. Well, let's see what other popular smartphones out there have to offer. The flagship Galaxy Note 9 starts at $1,000, which is the same starting price as Apple's flagship iPhone XS. And the Galaxy S9 starts at $720 compared to Apple's iPhone XR, which starts at $750. And the Google Pixel 3 starts at $800, with the larger XL model starting at $900, so it just isn't factually correct to say Apple is the only company raising the prices of their smartphones. And when it comes to repairability, you might be surprised, because both the Galaxy Note 9 and Google Pixel 3 received repairability scores of 4 out of 10 from iFixit.com, while the iPhone XS actually scored higher, receiving a 6 out of 10. So judging from the metrics we've just covered, the iPhone isn't significantly more expensive or less easy to repair than the industry average. I just think Apple tends to receive more criticism on the internet because of certain biases people innately have. Now, one of the most common reasons why people think Apple is doomed is because Steve Jobs is no longer CEO. They think Jobs kept the company on track and focused on creating the best products and making the best decisions for their customers. And while all of that is true, I don't believe Steve Jobs was the only creative person at Apple helping to build the best products in the world. I think it was a team of people driven by a philosophy that the company was founded upon back in 1976. And that's why they've continued to create incredible products despite Jobs' absence. I mean, the Apple Watch, HomePod, AirPods, iPhone X, iPad Pro, and Apple Pencil are only products Apple could make, and they all meet the same high standards that we saw when Jobs was CEO. But some of you guys disagree, with Ricky having this to say: "These are dark times for Apple. Steve Jobs would have never approved calling the iPhone confusing names and so many different options, especially releasing 2 flagship devices in the same year. Tim Cook's days are numbered." Now, let me begin by saying it's impossible to know what Steve Jobs would have thought about any of the decisions being made by Apple today, so I don't think it makes sense to try and guess. But what we can do is reflect on the decisions Jobs did make as CEO, and I think Ricky would be surprised to discover that Jobs was no stranger to releasing products with confusing names. Back in 1999, Jobs introduced updated iMacs, but it wasn't just a simple model upgrade like we're used to today. Jobs actually introduced 3 iMacs: the regular iMac, the iMac DV, and the iMac DV Special Edition, with the only differences between all 3 models being spec bumps, a super drive, and a different color. In fact, product names have been a point of contention for Apple as long as I can remember. The iPod was considered a very odd name when it was first released, and when it came to the iMac, Jobs actually wanted to name it the Mac Man, but Ken Segall helped change Jobs' mind about that. Even products like the iPad and MacBook Air were criticized for having silly names when they were first announced. But history has made it clear that Jobs wasn't some product naming mastermind. He was just one of the many talented people at Apple contributing ideas and trying to do what was best for the company. Now I want to highlight a couple of comments that I actually agree with, starting with Rom, who said, "I don't think Apple is doomed. First, the iPhone's lifespan is improving with every device, so people are not willing to upgrade to a new phone. Apple already entered the subscription business and it's already disrupted the music industry, now they'll do the same for video streaming. If rumors are to be believed, Apple is going to launch AR glasses. This will disrupt another market. And don't forget the self-driving car. So Apple isn't doomed. It's the best time to buy Apple stock." Now, there were a couple interesting things I took away from this comment that I don't think many people consider. First, it does appear that iPhone users are upgrading their devices less frequently than ever before, and that's likely because they're more expensive, more powerful, and have an operating system that runs better on older devices, so there's less incentive to upgrade. The second point has to do with Apple's future prospects, because when Apple almost went bankrupt in the 90s, they were unable to recover until they established decent product roadmaps that would someday put them at the forefront of an industry, and they eventually achieved this with the iMac and iPod. So if you truly believe Apple is doomed, you're implying that the company has no plans for future products that would revolutionize an industry. But this isn't the case at all, because like Rom said, Apple is investing heavily in augmented reality, which I think is an industry on the verge of exploding in popularity. And if Apple is on the forefront of this explosion, they'll end up in a very favorable position in the market. Apple has also been experimenting with self-driving car technology, which Tim Cook called the mother of all AI projects. So based on all the evidence we have today, it's clear that Apple has very ambitious plans for the future, and I think we're going to see some unbelievable technology coming from the company in the near future. Now, I want to end the video with this comment from Bing Bong that I think sums up things pretty well. They say, "Lots of companies aren't doomed, but I do think Apple is reaching the limits of what people are willing to pay in market saturation." And I agree 100%. Many smartphone companies are testing the limits of just how high they can price their devices since the market is becoming saturated, and this is resulting in customer frustration and slowing sales. But that doesn't mean these companies are doomed. They're simply reacting to the market and trying their best to maintain revenue growth year after year. It just ends up that Apple catches the most flack for these changes than other companies. So those are some reasons why Apple isn't doomed, and if you want to vote in future polls like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.